Hi guys, welcome to this video on Act 3, Scene 6 from Macbeth. Now before I start talking about the scene, I'm just going to say of Act 3, Scene 5, I'm not going to do a video on that. Now that scene wasn't written by Shakespeare and was included after the publication of the play, so I don't think the scene is valid, and I don't know that the scene is going to come up. Also, they don't actually include the scene in the version that I'm playing to you, so I'm just not going to do it. So now Act 3, Scene 6 is very similar to the final scene in Act 2. We see Lennox talking with a random lord about the state of Scotland, about the kind of political state of the country, about Macduff and Malcolm and all of the things that are happening in Scotland and in England. This once more kind of shows views away from the action and kind of shows the opinions of ordinary people and the opinions of those that aren't directly involved with the plots of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Okay, well before we go through the annotation, let's have a little listen to the scene.
My former speeches have but hit your thoughts, which can interpret further. Only, I say, things have been strangely born. The gracious Duncan was pitied of Macbeth. Marry, he was dead. And the right valiant Banquo walked too late, whom you may say, if please you, Fleance killed, for Fleance fled. Men must not walk too late. Who cannot want the thought how monstrous it was for Malcolm and for Donalbain to kill their gracious father? Damned fact, how it did grieve Macbeth. Did he not, straight in pious rage, the two delinquents tear, that were the slaves of drink and thralls of sleep? Was not that nobly done? Aye, and wisely too, for 'twould have angered any heart alive to hear the men deny it. So that I say, he hath borne all things well. And I do think that had he Duncan's sons under his key, as, and please heaven he shall not, they should find out what 'twere to kill a father. So should Fleance. But peace. For from broad words, and 'cause he failed his presence at the tyrant's feast, I hear Macduff lives in disgrace. Sir, can you tell where he bestows himself?
The noble Malcolm lives in the English court and is received of the most pious Edward. Thither Macduff is gone, to pray the holy king to lend his aid, that by his help we may again bring to our tables meat, sleep to our nights, free from our feasts and banquets bloody knives, do faithful homage and receive free honours all which we pine for now. And this report has so exasperate the king that he prepares for some attempt of war.
Sent he to Macduff?
He did. And with an absolute sir, not I, the clouded messenger turns me his back and hums as who should say, you'll rue the time that clogs me with this answer.
And that might well advise him to a caution, to hold what distance his wisdom can provide. Some holy angel fly to the court of England and unfold his message ere he come, that a swift blessing may soon return to this our suffering country, under a hand accursed.
I'll send my prayers with him.
Okay, so let's look at this scene. I think one of the interesting things to note is the character of Lennox. Now in this scene, he seems to both trust and distrust Macbeth. He begins the scene by talking about how Macbeth has acted properly, but ends the scene by referring to Macbeth as a tyrant and cursed and kind of a blight on the land of Scotland. This kind of ambiguity very much links in with the equivocation and juxtaposition that we've seen throughout the play up to now. And in this way, Lennox can be seen as really kind of trying to be careful with the words that he uses in case he's overheard and gets caught and, dealt with by Macbeth. In this scene, Lennox compares Duncan and Banquo's murders. He says that how strange that Duncan, murdered potentially by sons who fled, is similar to Banquo, whose son also fled, who may be seen to be murdered by Fleance. This shows he somewhat suspects Macbeth. However, in suspecting Macbeth, he has uncovered treason, but if Macbeth were to hear him talking like this, then he himself would be accused of treason. So all of this links in with the idea that a conspiracy is beginning to hatch to deal with Macbeth. Lennox then goes on to talk about Banquo. He says, the right valiant Banquo walked too late. Now there's ambiguity with this phrase. Is walked too late the idea that Banquo left Macbeth's court too late? You know, that if he'd left early with Fleance, he may not have been killed. But at the same time, is it a reference to the fact that Banquo walked at night? And that if he hadn't walked at night, the assassins wouldn't have been able to hide and murder him so easily. This is then backed up when Lennox says, men must not walk too late. Is this a lesson that people need to learn, that they need to get out of dangerous situations as quickly as possible? Or is it the lesson that people need to not do things at night time when it is easier for evil to flourish, when it's easier for bad things to happen? He then shows some trust in Macbeth, or fake trust in Macbeth. He says, damned fact how it did grieve Macbeth. The murder of Duncan grieved Macbeth so much that Macbeth then went on, in pious rage, the two delinquents tear. You know, that Macbeth went on to murder the people that were supposed to be guarding Duncan. He then goes on to use further ambiguity when he says of Macbeth, he has borne all things well. This is the idea that Macbeth is either managing things well, you know, he's managed to put things in the right order to avoid suspicion, or that he is manipulating things well by doing away with people that could potentially throw some guilt onto Macbeth. We then see the first example of Lennox's true feelings. He says, I do think that had he Duncan's sons under his key, as an't please heaven he shall not. And this is the idea that it is better if Macbeth doesn't have Malcolm and Donalbain. This is potentially because Lennox sees Malcolm and Donalbain as being forces that could come in and rescue Scotland from Macbeth. That they are symbols of goodness and light that could come in and get rid of this dark and awful tyrant, when he refers to Macduff missing the tyrant's feast. And consider this, you know, across this whole scene, consider how attitudes towards Macbeth are beginning to change. And this is an example of that. Macbeth here is called a tyrant, and this shows people's attitudes changing from the idea of brave Macbeth at the beginning of the play to the tyrant that he is now becoming. Lennox then refers to Macduff living in disgrace, and this sets up an opposition to Macbeth other than Malcolm and Donalbain. And in setting up an opposition to Macbeth, it kind of foreshadows the beginning of a fresh cycle of violence, that someone is going to wage war against Macbeth in Scotland, and this cycle of violence that we see ending at the beginning of the play, you know, with Macbeth and Banquo crushing a rebellion against Duncan, is going to once more rear its head when either Malcolm or Donalbain or Macduff march on Macbeth's castle and begin a fresh war. We then see the attitudes of this unnamed lord. He says, the son of Duncan, from whom this tyrant holds the due birth. So once more, we have the use of the word tyrant. But at the same time, this shows that he feels Macbeth shouldn't be king. By saying that Macbeth holds the due birth of the son of Duncan, shows that this lord believes more in the great chain of being, more in the idea that Duncan's named descendants should be the people on the throne rather than Macbeth. He then talks about Malcolm being in England, where he is received by the king at the time, Edward the Confessor. And he refers to Edward the Confessor, the King of England, of having grace, which contrasts Macbeth. You know, Macbeth is a king all about violence and bloodshed, whereas Edward the Confessor, who was a deeply religious king, who indeed, the title of Confessor relates to someone that has suffered for their religious beliefs. Now, this, again, is a massive contrast to Macbeth, who is invoking the supernatural forces, but at the same time, this is something that would have particularly appealed to King James, as he too was a deeply religious king, and respected anybody who had the courage to stand by their own religious values. He then refers to Malcolm being a victim of the malevolence of fortune, linking with the idea of fate, showing that Malcolm has been treated unfairly by fate. We then have more details of the conspiracy against Macbeth, where he says Macduff has gone to pray the Holy King upon his aid, that Macduff has gone to England to try and get the king to join him in a war with Macbeth, that they're going to march and take back the country, again linking with the idea of the cycles of violence. The Lord then kind of tries to show some of his hopes for what will be achieved by war with Macbeth. He says that by the help of these, with him above to ratify the work, we may again give to our tables meat, sleep to our nights, free from our feasts and banquets bloody knives. Now this kind of refers to a return to normality. By saying that him above to ratify the work, he's saying that God would condone the work and that God would see that it was a good thing to have happened, because if Malcolm takes the throne from Macbeth, then there is a restoration of the great chain of being and that hierarchy that people in this society live by. But at the same time, to say to give our tables meat, to feed the people of Scotland, sleep to our nights, the idea, using the motif of sleep, the end of Macbeth would bring peace to the Scottish people, free from our feasts and banquets bloody knives, stop all of the treachery and the murder and the backstabbing that's going on with Macbeth in power. Do faithful homage and receive free honours, all which we pine now. So basically saying that the state of Scotland at the minute is not one of peace, and that he wants peace to be returned, but for that to happen there first must be war. And again, that links in really massively with the cycles of violence. The idea that there is warfare, and then there is peacetime, and then there is warfare, and then there is peacetime. He wants the war to happen so that peace can come back to Scotland. And then we have it in absolute black and white, where he says he prepares for some attempt of war to overthrow Macbeth and reinitiate a cycle of violence. We then see Lennox's final reference to the attitude towards Macbeth. He says that he wants some holy angel fly to the court of England and unfold his message ere he come. This is the idea that for Malcolm and the English to invade Scotland, he believes would be a good thing. He says that a swift blessing may soon return to this our suffering country under a hand accursed, showing that he believes that under Macbeth, the country is suffering, that Macbeth is cursed and he in turn has cursed the land, doing away with the peace in Scotland. But at the same time, this swift blessing may be ironic. He's asking for a quick war, that there should be some swift bloodshed and then everything will be fine. The idea that violence in this instance is the only thing that can return peace to Scotland, again indicating the cycles of violence. Right. So as we now move forward in the play, we've got to think about how are things changing. We are past the halfway point now, so we have Macbeth at the beginning of the play, and we're now beginning to see Macbeth towards the end of the play. Also, we're starting to see attitudes towards Macbeth change. So we've got to be noting that down as the play progresses. We've got to be thinking more about Macbeth's violence and the way that he kills, and what this shows about Macbeth and honour. We need to consider more about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's mental health, how that is going to begin degrading even more. They're going to become more paranoid, more sleep deprived, more manic in the way that they behave. And also note the idea that this scene marks the beginning of a fresh cycle of violence. That there is going to be more war as the play progresses. Okay, so that is Act 3, Scene 6. I hope you found that useful, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.